Well, Mars has been a family-held company for over 100 years, mostly known for its confectionery products. So Snickers, Skittles, Starburst, Twix, all the names that you would hopefully have eaten when you were younger. And then also, a lot of people don't know we've been in pet food since the 1930s. So Sheba, Whiskas, Pedigree. What we've done in the last few years is we've expanded that portfolio. So we have a partnership with Kind, which is a nut-based product with real food, and we've also extended into the pet care area with a number of acquisitions as well as organic moves. The best known being the vet health services area with VCA, Banfield we already had, and Blue Pearl. So we've evolved the portfolio to keep up with the consumer and move with the times.
And I know with that comes a ton of growth and a lot of ideas for growth in the future. What does the game plan look like to kind of make this massive growth happen?
Yeah, so as you know, in the last, I'd say since 2014, I think the CPG industry generally has been growth challenged to some extent. And I think we identified fairly early on that there was opportunities to grow even more in some of the adjacent areas. And that's why we made the moves we've made, because the consumer is shifting, the consumer is changing. Both millennials and Gen Zs are looking for something slightly different. And part of our 5 principles is the consumer is our boss under the quality principle, and we've got to move where the consumer is.
With Gen Z changing, how are they changing? What changes are you seeing?
Yeah, so I've got 2 Gen Zs myself. So Gen Z's 1995 to now. So I've got Cameron and Charlotte. So I either know a lot about Gen Zs or very little, they would probably say. But I think some of the big differences are, they're looking for more transparency. They're looking for healthier options. They're looking for a more holistic, perhaps immersive experience with data as well. And fundamentally, some of their, the things that they're doing, they're buying fewer cars, they're buying much fewer houses. So, we see that as an opportunity to keep innovating within our core products, but also to add other products that they'll be interested in the future.
When we're thinking about what Gen Z wants and why they want these things, especially thinking about sustainability, why is this generation so engaged in this area, do you think?
Well, I think they grew up in a different time, So, I grew up, I hate to say, there was no cell phones, there was no iPads. They're growing up in a technologically advanced age. They're growing up with a much broader perspective on the world than certainly I had. And with that, because they're looking for new experiences, and they're really seeking that transparency and clarity of where do the products come from, are these products sustainable, what are they doing for the planet, how robust are they, they're asking all those questions.
And it's interesting because obviously there's such a wide range of brands that Mars represents. Thinking about some of the more brands that have been around for longer, how do you apply these new learnings and make kind of iconic brands like M&M's, for example, that have been around for so long, and make them relevant to Gen Z and other consumers today? Yeah,
that's a great question. So traditionally, the route to market for M&M's would be your traditional stores. And now with digital commerce, it's a new avenue, new opportunity. So what we're doing is we're using social media to interact with the consumer in a much different way. We're offering right here in Times Square. You've got the M&M store. You can go and have a full immersive experience. You can now have M&Ms with your face on them, which I had last week. That looks pretty good, actually. So you can have all different types of things. It's not just the standard M&Ms, and I think that's going to keep evolving as you have a closer interaction with the consumer than perhaps you can do when they're buying from a store. You don't know who's buying. With these interactions, you know who's buying, you know what they're interested in. You can actually start a dialogue, a much deeper emotional connection with the consumer, which is fantastic with a brand like M&M's. And similarly with some of the new brands, you have an opportunity to do that as well.
Sustainability has been a huge topic, and Mars has made some big promises on sustainability. Yes. How was kind of being a private company able to empower you to kind of make these big commitments when it comes to sustainability?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I would say it was fundamental because we have family ownership, we have family members who are passionate in this space. In fact, in 1947, so before this was even fashionable, one of our owners wrote a letter to everybody in the company. And it actually said that our role is much bigger than just making profit. It's about how do you deal with all your stakeholders all the way through the value chain. So it's in our DNA. It's something we're very proud of. It's something we've always done, but it's been relatively low key. You know, for the first 100 years, we let our brands do the talking. Everybody knew M&M's, everybody knew Pedigree, everybody knew Twix, everybody knew Uncle Ben's, but not so much about, I think, the DNA of the company itself. And things have changed now in building that reputation. So we've said we've put $1 billion into sustainable in a generation, and you know, we're fully committed, the families behind it, and we didn't have to convince you know, financial analysts it was a good idea. We just had the trust and the support of our family, and it allowed us to make those generational decisions.
Do you think that other companies could be doing more on this topic?
We could all be doing more, honestly, ourselves included. But there's a lot of really good work out there, and we're not doing it all ourselves. You know, we're doing a lot ourselves, but we're also trying to build a coalition for change. You know, trying to create an entity that's bigger than any one company, and we're doing that in conjunction with companies, and we're doing it in conjunction with NGOs and governments to really create that catalyst for change, which will benefit everyone.
Gen Z, obviously, sustainability is a huge issue for them. How does that kind of connect to what Mars is focusing on when it comes to sustainability?
Yeah, so it's, again, you know, Gen Z is looking for a number of things, and you know, first of all, to attract them to your brands, to attract them to your company, and to get them to stay, you've got to have a higher order purpose, you know, and that's where the world we want tomorrow starts with how we do business today. I think is such a great calling, and then you superimpose the individual areas like creating a better world for pet, or better food today for a better world tomorrow from the different segments. That's a big attraction. Then I think the brands themselves, you know, are really very powerful for Gen Z. But what we've been trying to do is, you know, the data's, you know, pretty clear. It says Gen Z is looking for more transparency. They're looking to see what is it you're doing with your brands and your company that's really good for the environment, and how can I be part of that?
Looking over the past 30 years, what has been the biggest change at Mars that you've seen happen?
I would say the most recent changes in digital. I think the pace of change in digital in the last 2 or 3 years has been phenomenal, and keeping pace with that is not easy, but it does create amazing opportunities as well. So it's everything, as I say, from in the factory all the way through to e-commerce and everything in between. It's radically different from when I started.
And do you think that people's vision of Mars and kind of their understanding of Mars's identity has changed over the last decades as well?
Yes, I think so, because, you know, as I said, the first 100 years we let our brands do the talking. It's only in the last few years that I think we've come out to talk about the type of company we are, you know, what we stand for, you know, what we're trying to achieve. And, you know, I'm a great believer if you can build a fast-growing, dynamic company that embraces change, and you're doing something that's not just about financial performance, but also about, you know, what you're putting back into the ecosystem in which you operate, then that's a beautiful thing, and you know, that would be a great legacy to leave behind.
What have been some of the biggest trends that you're seeing now that Mars is tapping into?
Yeah, so I think there's a few trends. First is obviously with, I think, a greater realization about obesity and a greater realization that of sugar intake. You know, people are looking for a more balanced approach. Now, we've always been advocates of the treats, so we've seen the opportunity to portion control, smaller portions, changing some of the ingredients from saturated fats to non-saturated fats is one. Then I think there's been an increase in the premiumization. People are looking for, you know, more of an experience, and so we're providing that through things like our M&M stores, through our My M&Ms, as I mentioned earlier, that you can have your name on it, face for a wedding, for whatever. So we're seeing some big changes there, but also in the way that they communicate with the brands, and you know, and some of the things we've done are pretty amazing. With the, you know, Snickers brand online, using "You're not you when you're hungry," has really resonated with those younger consumers.
If I'm interviewing you in 10 years, what do you think the biggest changes will be at Mars?
I think it's a great question. I think you would see us expanding into even more geographic territories. So we have opportunities in places like Africa and Indonesia to increase our footprint. I think you would see us moving into even more food-based areas to be defined. So I think we see us with a broader footprint. But I think most importantly, it comes back to what I said earlier. It's about more about what's the world we're creating tomorrow by the way that we do business today. How we're creating a dynamic, vibrant company that attracts the best talent that allows us to do the best for the stakeholders in which we work with.